Hey there, welcome back to 16 Stops, a podcast. My name is Josh, and I'm here with Brandon.
What's up?
And today in episode 17, we're going to talk all about the brand new Sony A9 III.
Yes, I'm pumped for this one.
Yeah, Brandon, why are you... we were talking yesterday, and you were so excited to talk about this, so...
Yeah, well, I'm mostly just fired up.
Okay.
I'm really... We'll get into it later.
Okay, because I feel like neither of us are going to buy this camera, so...
I am a maybe, but most of my fire comes from the idiots complaining about a camera they know nothing about.
Okay, well, we'll definitely get into that in this episode, and I'm curious to see why you might be a maybe as well, because I hadn't heard that yet, so... All right, so first of all, personal news. Brandon, I got the Blackmagic 6K full frame like 2 or 3 days after the last podcast came out. I'm borrowing it from B&H. They've been so gracious to like lend me stuff. So if you haven't checked out that last episode, I highly recommend you do that because there's a lot of good discussion about not only the new camera, but also Blackmagic in general and our thoughts about what they're going to have moving forwards and all that sort of stuff. So it's been really cool to get in and test out. I've done 2 videos on it. One was the sort of first impressions, and then one I compared it with my 6K G2. Kind of surprising results. And if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend people check that out too.
Yeah, crazy. So, never mind. We'll do that later.
Okay. But a couple things I want to mention is that in my testing, I don't see a lot of technical testing on these cameras, so I just post my results and that's what it is. But dynamic range was essentially the same, which on their website, they are listed the same. So yes, but it is surprising to have a new sensor. Low light was actually better on the 6K G2, which was definitely surprising.
Yes.
And then lastly, I think the thing that amazed me the most was how similar the colors were between the 2 cameras having different sensors. They're almost identical. So
that's great. If you have, a G2 or an older one and you're wanting to match.
I'm just blown away with Blackmagic that they have their colors that dialed in, that like you could have different sensors and they still pretty much match. That's super cool. I don't see a lot of other camera companies doing that. So other news for me, I finally sold my Canon R3, which anyways, it was just sitting here collecting dust.
How many times have you had that camera?
A few. And I don't think I'll be getting it again. I absolutely love it.
No?
It's just, I have too many cameras and I keep trying to sell them, and then I wind up buying other cameras and it wasn't getting a lot of use. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And the price has dropped significantly on that because Canon has it $1,000 off right now. So that didn't help, but it is what it is.
Yep.
I would like to have it if I just had unlimited funding for everything, but it doesn't get a lot of use. What about you, Brandon? What's been new with you? You've been busy.
Crazy busy, man. The last month has been like an absolute whirlwind. That's the busiest October I've ever had, for sure.
Okay, so YouTube, client work, what kind of stuff you've been working on?
Yeah, we did the big YouTube road trip, which turned into a big video. And because of that road trip, I got a special camera. We talked about this on the last one, and I've just been trying to work that edit out. Hopefully I'll have that done in a week or so. And then, yeah, ton of client work. I have 2 retainer clients. And so that's, 5 videos a month almost, 5 to 6 videos a month, plus the 2 other channels for YouTube and a podcast. So yeah, just super busy.
And being a husband and a dad as well. So yeah, a lot going on, man.
Man, yeah, family.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I've had a little bit of client work, not as much as I had earlier on in the year, but it's tough balancing all that for sure. Because to me, like the client work takes priority. So over YouTube. So Brandon, did you buy a Sony yet?
I'm real close, man. I'm like real close. Real close.
Okay. Yeah, I know we talk about that a lot, but I'm very limited with my Sony gear at this point. I have my FX3 and but I'm trying to mix it up a little bit with some of my other cameras and I'm going to try shooting with Canon and Red a little bit more for my client work and see how that goes too. Because I've been using Sony almost exclusively. So
cool.
Yeah. So on also a YouTube situation that we're crossing some milestones for subscribers, which I think is always good to acknowledge because it's super cool.
Yeah.
And I'm very humbled and honored about it too. So I know for you crossed 30,000 on your main channel, which congrats, dude. That's a big milestone. Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate it. That one was a big one for me. Not necessarily because of the the overall number. And I know that's like, it's a big number and it's not a big number. It depends on how you look at it. But man, my channel just died. My channel died like a year and a half ago. And it's been a slog, trying to get content out, getting people to watch. And I was really fortunate that road trip video that I shot, just for whatever reason, has done super well. And it's pulled in a lot
That's
of
awesome,
new people.
man. That's
so
awesome.
I'm stoked about that.
Yeah, my channel's just crossed 25,000, which is pretty mind-blowing to me too. And we talk about these numbers as YouTubers, and these are vanity metrics for the most part. Now, these do not indicate how many views you get or how many or how much money you make, that sort of stuff. And from someone like myself with my farming channel having over 200,000 subscribers, I literally don't care about that stuff, but it does open opportunities for you with that vanity metric. So that's what I care about.
Yeah, as soon as my channel got that little uptick and I went from like 28 to 29, like the amount of emails I was getting for collaborations like quintupled. So,
yep,
which is great. I turned all of them down because they're all pretty crap. But still,
but it's true.
It's nice. Yeah,
it's a metric that a lot of people look at still and value for decisions whether or not to work with people or reach out to them and stuff like that. So, all right, so on to everyone's favorite segment. What did we buy?
What did we buy?
All right, so part of the discussion about the Blackmagic full frame was when I got in to test it, because I love my 6K G2, which is what I'm filming on. It's been my studio camera for like a month now, and
yeah,
I don't think I want to use anything else. It's so easy to use.
Dude, they're so easy to use.
And like, because I always leave my camera mounted in my studio, it's fairly inexpensive versus the other cameras I have, and I don't feel like I need to pull it out for anything else, so it's been good. So I testing out the 6K full frame, thinking like maybe I'll just get the full frame for the studio and then use the 6K G2 for like an overhead or B cam or whatever. And then after my testing, I'm like, I don't need full frame in my studio. They're basically identical images. So I bought a second 6K G2.
There you go. And saved yourself $1,000 compared to the full frame.
Yeah, because it's on sale right now for $1,600. And you compare that with the full frame, which is $2,600. I'm really happy. Now I have matching cameras, so that makes my life so easy. And if you haven't owned matching cameras before, it like makes your life so easy for operation of the cameras, image, all that stuff.
Yeah. Everybody in the comments, let's do an over-under on how long Josh keeps the 6K G2.
Okay. I forget the last one that you were picking on me about. The C70 probably?
C70 was it.
Okay.
6K G2, I'm going to go with 8 weeks.
You're going to raise it?
I'm gonna raise it to 8 weeks.
Okay, I know. Does that include the time or just from now?
Just from now. We'll say just from now, 8 weeks.
Okay. We should start putting money down about this,
We can run like an online super chat betting platform.
Yeah. All right, Brandon, so what about you? You picked up a new light, right?
Yeah, that's just basically it. I got a new light. I got a new camera bag, which is great. That I can talk about on yesterday. By the time you watch this, it'll be yesterday. So, but no, I got a new light. It's a light mat. It's the Godox NOLED F400 Bi. So it's a 4 foot by 2 foot LED light mat. Really light, really thin, and using it right now. We're trying it out. I literally just set it up for the first time and popped it on like 5 minutes before we started this. Probably not the best situation to throw that into, but we're doing it. It's crazy bright. It's 400 watts.
They're really cool, man. And I know you've been looking for one for a while. I hope more people start making them. The price starts coming down. I think they're really handy to like stuff them in tight places, and you don't. Also, I'm just thinking like if you're bringing them to client jobs and you don't have to set up a huge softbox, and it's kind of intimidating for talent and stuff like that. So that's really cool.
This one was, so I was looking at the IntelliTech ones. They're very nice, but the comparable sized one with the comparable watts was 1,800.
Wow.
So this was $800 cheaper than that. And they've been on back order forever, and Adorama just happened to get a few in, and I was lucky enough to see it. So
cool.
We'll see how it works. But so far, I'm liking it.
All right, maybe make a review at some point. That would be cool.
Nah, probably not.
Okay. So Black Friday's coming up, Brandon. Look, are you your eyes out for any deals coming up?
Yeah, I I do, you know, you asked me like, have you bought a Sony yet? And I haven't. I don't think you and I both belong to the secret society known as the B&H creator thingy.
Yeah.
And that's like the best deal I think I'm going to see on the ZV-E1. That's the camera I'm looking at buying. Other than that, I don't know. The DZO Vespids are also Blackfighter. Like they've got a really good deal. So I don't know. I would love to buy IRIX stuff, but they just seem to refuse to give me the 65 millimeter.
Yeah.
So they just keep kicking that can down the road.
They announced that at NAB, which was in what, April? And they still haven't sent it out yet, you know?
Yeah. Anyway, that's where I'm at, Josh. What about you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we'll kind of see what's going on. I'm gonna do some experimenting with my gear and see what I need, but I'm really loaded up right now. I'm trying to sell things actually, so.
Same. I still have a bunch of stuff up for sale.
Yeah, for sure. And if you guys don't know what we're talking about, there is a discount for B&H Photo for creators, and you have to apply for the program. We're not allowed to like talk about prices, but I'll just say this, that like Sony is very heavily discounted in there.
Yeah.
So Sony is definitely, you know, we always talk about their influencer game is very strong, and that's part of it, is that they offer crazy discounts. All right, so let's get on to news and rumors. So I think the big thing is the actor strike just ended. That's huge, man.
Yeah, it's really big.
So that's awesome. I think maybe the length of the writer strike was like, hey, they were like, hey, the actors are going to be serious about this. We should probably work with them. I don't know all the details, but
I don't know how it works.
It's funny, like I never thought, maybe you too, that like this kind of stuff would impact my life. But then like the Star Trek project we worked on got delayed because of that. And we're just like, oh, I didn't even realize it mattered in my life. And I guess it does. So
yeah.
So because of that, Red has just announced a new sale. Do you want to talk about that?
10% on accessories, 15% on packages, and then they have special financing for Raptor.
Too bad body only is not 15% off. That would be
that'd be pretty rad.
That'd be pretty tempting. But anyways, and no, Red is not paying us to talk about this. And
no.
I always like to pass on deals to people, because if you're looking and then you hear, you know, you could save yourself a bunch of money. So that's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get on to Canon releases, more niche lenses from Canon. So we talked about these last time as in rumors, and now they're out. So first of all, the 200-800 6.3 to f9 came out. As expected, $1,900, not an L series lens. It's big. I mean, it's 800 mils. It's like lens that has not existed before. So we're seeing this trend. 800 is cool, man. 800 millimeters is cool.
For sure. And I think the f-stop on that camera is probably less important, at least at the end of that, you know, focal length than people probably realize. So it's not a lens I would immediately discount just because it's variable apertured and high.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you look at Canon's current offerings, like their 800 f11 is $1,000, and this is an 800 f9 for a little bit more, but you also get a zoom in there. So
yeah,
I'm just curious about the optics. It didn't look like they sent it out to many people to test, so I don't know about image quality yet. That's what I'm really curious about. But
no clue.
Yeah, but I know for me, my 100-500 is just like magical, so it'd be hard to compete with that. All right, so I think the big lens release is the 24-105 f2.8, which, again, a lens that has not existed. So that one's coming out at $3,000. What are your thoughts about that lens, Brandon? Because it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure for like a documentary shooter or a wedding shooter, that lens is just going to crush for some people. It sucks that the power zoom accessory is so freaking expensive for it. But I mean, it's not that big of a lens. It's big, don't get me wrong, but it's not as big as I thought it was going to be. The optics look amazing, crazy sharp. So, I mean, that could be a one and done lens for a lot of people.
Yeah, it looks like a 7200 almost.
Yeah.
You know, like that sort of style lens. The power zoom is interesting. I'm wondering if they're going to do more of that down the line. It looked like there was like ways to control the power zoom over, you know, networks and stuff like that for broadcast. So there's a lot of cool stuff coming out of this. It doesn't seem like a handheld sort of lens. Like if you're doing video, I feel like it's more of like a tripod lens.
Yeah, I don't know. I watched a couple of things on it where the person testing it and the person using it only handheld it, and the stabilization was great. So I don't know. I mean, what is it, 3 pounds? It was lighter than the 28-70, which I thought was surprising.
Canon's new lenses that have stabilization are incredible with the IBIS, like especially on the longer end. It's kind of mind-blowing, actually.
But it's a cool lens. I'm sure they're gonna. I'm sure they're gonna sell a lot of those.
So then they came out with the RFS 10 to 18, so variable aperture for $329. I kind of thought they would come out with this a while ago, and I'm glad they're coming out with some APS-C lenses for the RF system. This, I don't know if the optics are the same as that older EFS 10 to 18, but I think the f-stop is the same, so maybe it's similar.
It's the CNE and the CNR or whatever. It's one of those.
So there's some firmware updates coming out, I think next month for their cinema cameras.
Okay.
And they have this new control app, which I think I texted you. And it was like all of them except for the R5C.
Yeah, like what the hell? God damn.
It looks cool though, Brandon.
Yeah.
I'd like to try it.
Listen.
I don't have a camera to try it on though.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've said the Red Control app is just like one of the greatest things ever.
It is.
And so having one for your Canon cinema camera would be awesome. What? Just why? Like why leave out the R5C? Was it too new? Is it too new of a camera?
Dude, it's classic Canon. It's like, oh, you get in your cinema cameras, but not the bottom level one. You got to get the C70, man.
But like our entire company right now is resting on the success of the R5C. At least that's what we're telling everybody.
Yeah, they're pushing that pretty hard.
Oh, well. Nice work, Canon.
Anyways, they're still updating their cameras though, man. That's cool. All right, so Apple announcement. I think the actual announcement wasn't as interesting as how they made the announcement, but there's new MacBooks, the M3s and M3 iMacs. It doesn't look like they're coming out with the 27-inch iMac Pro, which I think a lot of people would love to see. Everything is just like slightly faster, slightly better, different color. It sounds like classic Apple news. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't believe the M3 is already out. Like we just got an M2.
I know.
We had just gotten the M1 like MacBook Pros, and then they were like, curveball, you just bought one, bitch. Like, now you get a M2. And we're like, oh, man, now I got to upgrade. And then you're literally walking home with your brand new M2, and they're like, M3s are out. You're like, God damn it.
I'm pretty happy with my M1, but, you know. So I was hoping for some new displays. There's some rumors about that, but that didn't happen. I want to see a 32-inch studio display. That's what I want.
That would be pretty wicked.
So I think the biggest news about this was at the very end, they flashed shot on iPhone. And it was interesting. I was watching this, and I was watching, I was like, what camera did they shoot this on? Not that it looked bad, but I couldn't really like figure it out at all. Like I was looking at the image, and I'm like, I don't know what this is. And then I was kind of surprised at the end. So there was a lot of discussion, both sides of the discussion about this. The fact that they used an iPhone for this and all that kind of stuff. So
hats off to them. I mean, that's putting your money where your mouth is. So
it is, yeah, and I think that's cool. And the couple things that stood out to me was like, of course, they have like cranes and dollies and huge lights and all the stuff from all the footage from the BTS that they brought out. But they were also using the Blackmagic phone app to actually do the recording, and this kind of goes along with the fact that there's been no love for Final Cut Pro, which I know we complain about all the time. It just seems like they're developing the hardware and letting everyone else do the software. Like they're not even using their own camera app. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. I know we've got a Final Cut Pro update coming in like a week or so, right? But
I'm not updating.
It's just like it really does feel like they've just kind of forgotten about Final Cut Pro.
Yeah, and if you watch that announcement, it was like they talked DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro, and then
Premiere Pro
and Final Cut. Like it was like, anyways. Let's get on to Sony, which will lead us into the main discussion. So, of course, with the announcement of the A9 III, they also announced a new lens, the 300 f2.8 GM, for $6,000. Interesting release, very niche lens because of the focal length, but it looks very light, and I think the price is a little surprising to me because their big boy primes are a lot more expensive.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this the other day that I think Sony priced the A9 III and this new lens as a F it, let's see what happens, and they'll probably bring the price down a little later, but yeah, we'll see.
Looks like a cool lens for the people that need it.
That's going to be a big part of this discussion.
Yeah. All right. So with those two announcements, and we'll, of course, get into the A9 III in depth, but they also released some firmware update announcements.
How much do you want to bet something comes out right before those firmware updates.
I don't think so, but let's talk about that too. So first of all, the firmware updates, it's funny because they're scheduled to come out in March, Brandon. March. It's November. So, and they're very limited. So they're adding focus breathing compensation to the A1. And then the A7S III is getting focus breathing comp and the DCI 4K option that's in the FX3. And there was a bunch of other stuff that I don't really know what it is and doesn't really matter that much to us. So that was it. So the things okay, focus breathing compensation. That was like the bare minimum. That was the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Like they had to do that. But like we don't get custom LUTs like we do in the FX3, which would be in the A7S III. No Cine EI. And the biggest thing...
Doesn't the ZV-E1 get custom LUTs?
I think it probably does.
I think it does.
I don't know, but that's funny. For me, with the A1 especially, it still doesn't have bird autofocus in video.
Huh. Okay.
Like, you can select it, but it doesn't work. And same thing in the A7S III.
Hats off to Sony for...
So, like,
for putting out an update.
The bare minimum, man. The bare minimum. So anyways, so you think that they're going to announce a new camera right before this comes out? I feel like this just stretched out the like, I don't think we're going to see an A7S IV for a long time.
There's a, we'll talk about it here in a bit, but there's also a firmware update that's coming out in March for the A9 III as well. And so it just seems like they're just doing this all at the same time. But like, can't you just do it now for the A9 or the A1 and the A7 III? Is it the A7S III or the A7 III? A7S III, sorry.
Yeah, A7S III.
I don't know. I'm just kind of a pessimist when it comes to big business. And I can totally see big business, like literally 2 weeks before this firmware comes out, they release some new cameras that you're like, why?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I just don't understand why why you'd announce a firmware update 4 months out. Like, it's not a complicated update. Like, just put it out.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some strategy behind that. They're just trying to get the A1, A7S III people to like hang in there longer before they can sell them another camera. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think I don't have all of the reasons, but something tells me it's for money.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would agree on that.
So,
all right. So let's get on to the A9 III. First of all, $6,000. We'll talk about the price. The main highlighting specs, of course, are the sensor, 24.6 megapixel global shutter.
Full frame.
It shoots full
stacked.
frame, and it shoots stacked, and it shoots 120 frames per second in photo. Those are the big things. So global shutter, full frame. I think this is the first time that's been done. Is that correct? Okay, so that's a big deal, and we're going to talk more about global shutter and the things that brings on as well. And of course, the frames per second is also crazy. So in addition to that, we got all the new stuff that you'd expect with a new Sony camera. So we're getting the focus breathing, the AI autofocus, the dynamic active stabilization, which we saw in the ZV-E1, the 8-stop IBIS from the A7R5, that tilty flippy screen from the A7R5.
Yeah.
One thing that I didn't hear anyone talk about, which I talked about in my live stream I did a couple days ago, was that they put an OLPF in this camera.
Yeah, crazy.
Which I don't think Sony does put OLPFs in their cameras.
I'm wondering why they chose to do it, and the answer to that I do not have. Josh, you are free to speculate.
I have no idea. I mean, I would love to have an OLPF in all the cameras as a video shooter because it just gets rid of moire, and like that's really hard to fix in post. So I'm a big fan of that. It does take off a little bit of sharpness, which I think is why Sony doesn't put it in there a lot of the time, especially with their higher res stuff. Not sure, but I didn't hear anyone talk about it. I just found it because I was looking through the specs on Sony's like webpage, and I was like, it has no OPF? That's crazy. So let's first of all talk about some of the stuff that they didn't talk about. And I want to preface this because this is a stills camera. It is a hybrid camera, but it is really made for photography. And I don't do any photography. I know, Brandon, you do some photography. And so this is going to be part of the discussion. But I want to talk about the video elements of it because that's my angle. That's why I look at every time I look at a camera. So the things that they didn't talk about and was not mentioned, first of all, is dynamic range. Not one person talked about it. It was not in the spec sheet. There was no one talked about image quality or dynamic range. It was like, if you look at every other Sony camera, it'll say like 15 stops or 15 plus stop. There's no mention of dynamic range anywhere. And that's always a red flag to me.
Yep.
The other thing is ISO performance. And this is a big question mark as well. And I think a lot of that has to come down to the global shutter. So if people don't know this, there are some downsides to having a global shutter sensor. And a lot of it comes down to image quality and noise performance. And when you have a global shutter sensor, the noise performance is generally worse, which will then it will give you lower dynamic range as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was one of the things about the Komodo when it came out. Brandon, you could probably speak on this more because you were kind of in the market for that. But I know that was people were worried about the fact that it had a global shutter and it would reduce the dynamic range.
I just remember Phil and Jared talking about the process of building the Komodo and being able to push it past what they thought, it was capable of. And that's why they were like, let's do it.
Yeah, so that's definitely something to concern about. And the fact that they're not talking about it is weird.
Yeah,
right?
It says a lot when you don't say anything.
Yeah, I agree. And and as camera nerds and people that make content about this stuff, I'm trying to read between the lines all the time. So
I'm wondering if they were at that like event, in New York, and the Sony guy is up there and he's talking about all the stuff that he can do. And then there was just like a thing that came up about dynamic range, and he just like skip. And then they just continued on with the presentation.
It just seemed like the announcement was all about speed. It was like the teaser was the world's fastest camera. All they talked about was the 120 frames per second, like autofocus, like all that stuff.
I think it's safe to say this is not going to have the dynamic range of, a Komodo or maybe one of their other cameras. But for all the people that are getting pissed off, like, shut up, it's not a cinema camera, it's a photo camera. And it's a very niche photo camera at that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people see global shutter, they think video camera, because a lot of people are curious about the Komodo or the KX, and they're like, hey, I can get global shutter, but with autofocus and Stabe and all the modern things that you'd get in a mirrorless camera. But this is not a video camera. Like, it does do some cool video, and it shoots 4K 60, oversample from 6K because it has a 6K sensor, and it also shoots 4K 120 with no cropping. And it has a pixel bin. So that's new for Sony too.
Freaking rad.
So with that, what my concern is?
Overheating.
So
yeah. I heard, and I can't remember where I heard this, but I heard from somebody that it has better runtimes than the A1 in video for overheating.
Okay, so I'd love to see that. I don't know. I'm not disagreeing that that's not true or whatever, but I don't know if that's an 8K or the pixel bin 4K.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that they had to increase the size of that camera a little bit. Maybe just that extra little bit helps with heat dissipation. I'm not sure.
Okay. So I'll be curious about that. And again, this is not a video camera.
Here's the question, Josh. Imagine the shit they would have gotten had they just left video completely out of it.
Well, this is interesting because the A9 and A9 II didn't have any picture profiles for video.
Mm-hmm.
So that was always a like, oh, cool camera, but you can't shoot in log. So they did add that. Yeah. Well, of course we're going to put video in it. That's what all these cameras shoot video.
I'm just saying, if they had taken it out, people would have gotten really butthurt about that too.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so another thing about the ISO is that the base ISO for S-Log3 is 2000.
Mm-hmm.
That's also interesting on its own. And the base ISO for photos and for picture profile off, like the standard profiles, is 250.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly the tech behind that, but I'm guessing it has to do with trying to manipulate the dynamic range as best as possible.
I'm sure it does. In photo, I'm not as concerned, but video, like your base ISO being 2000, pretty interesting.
Yeah, so that changes the game a lot if you're used to shooting at like 640, 800, something like that, because you have to compensate a lot more with ND filters and stuff like that.
What's the base ISO for F-Log2?
It's like 1250.
Yeah, that's also
I think it's like 1250. There. Yeah, I remember when I tested that camera, I was like, what? So I don't know if it's just shifting dynamic range to the highlights to try to protect the highlights more because, when you raise the ISO, it's just what probably worked best for them with that sensor. So it's interesting. I'm really curious when it comes out and people get to test it and stuff like that.
Yep.
So let's talk about the fact that it has CF Express A and SD cards like they do with all their other cameras. I think this is a little bit of a limiting factor because of how fast it takes to unload the footage onto the cards.
Yeah.
So I wish they put in CFB or a new card or something faster, because I watched Chris and Jordan's video about it and they said it took like 11 seconds to dump the full burst.
Yeah.
So I think they just were like, oh, we have the system of these dual cards, and Sony Recycle put it in there, you know?
Yeah, I think the buffer is probably the biggest limiting factor on this camera. And even then, I think the choice to use the CF Express Type A was more of a money thing. We already have it. It's not going to cost us anymore, even though if we put CF Express Type B, this would be a better camera. But the 120 frames a second with that, pre-record and after record and being able to go in and pick the photos you want, I think negates the buffer issue to a large extent.
Okay. Do you think that it's just a matter of like, there's no way they could have gotten dual CFB cards in there? In that body design? I
think they could have done it, but it's a whole lot cheaper not to. And I do think that they justified it because of the pre-record and the fact that you can just hold that little button down for a millisecond or two. The fact that you can adjust the frames per second from 1 second all the way down to 0.1 seconds, so you can reduce the amount of shooting you need to do. I think there are workarounds around that they justified not putting CF Express Type B in there. But I think the biggest one was cost. And again, we've talked about this before, like just put an SSD in the freaking thing.
Yeah.
But
so
whatever.
I think it's cost. I think it was just like, hey, this is our system. We're just going to put this little module in there and we're going to go with that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the burst rate, because that's a huge feature. So it shoots 120 frames per second for like a second and change or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty crazy. And there's that speed boost button. Do you think that's a cool like implementation?
For sure. And that's kind of the thing that I'm talking about. It's like, yeah, I can use 120 frames a second, but if I've got pre-record and I've got that and that little button, especially if I'm a sports photographer, the speed is so important to them, not just in frames per second, but also delivery. I've got to go through, find the photo, and get it out as fast as I possibly can. And if I'm doing 120 frames per second for 8 seconds, and now I have 1,000 photos that I've got to go through and cull through and hand off to my person, that's ridiculous. So I think that little button is rad. I don't think it's actually a gimmick. I mean, it's kind of weird that you have to you got one hand on the shutter and then you come over and boost it with that. I don't think it's a gimmick. It's maybe a little gimmicky, but I think it's pretty useful. If pre-record wasn't in that camera, I think it would be a lot more of an egregious screw up to not have like CF Type B.
Okay, but would you like the implementation of like the fact that you push that button to get to that boost mode?
I would prefer it if I could map that to a button on the back or somewhere else.
Okay, maybe you can.
Because the people that are going to have the easiest time are the people with big hands, but not everybody's going to have a huge mitt, right? So like for them, they might have to, move their entire hand, and that just like screws up composition. And yeah, if you can map that button to a different button, I think you're fine and you're good to go.
Okay.
I like the idea of it for sure, but
okay, cool.
I don't know if it's ergonomically put in the best spot.
Okay, I think I'd have to hold it and play with it to see if it feels good or not. You know what I mean?
Just watching the video of somebody, they've got their finger down and then they're trying to reach over, and like, I have big hands. I could probably do it, but I'm still seeing people do that, and I don't want to do that. If I'm shooting, I don't want that movement. Like, I would rather just have like a thumb on the back.
Okay, so that was my first thought was, okay, 120 frames per second is cool, but then you have to edit. You have to go through and edit all those. It's so much stuff. And then I think I heard someone say that if you do the full 120 frame per second burst, in RAW plus JPEG, it's like 6 gigs.
Yeah.
Like that's
bananas.
crazy.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the body design, because they did make some subtle changes. I heard the grip is better.
Yeah.
It's like a different material. They also kind of rounded the corners of the camera a little bit, which is a change for Sony. They're very like, like sharp corners.
Yeah.
And the shutter button is like slightly different. I think they're making it a little bit more
down.
ergonomic.
Yeah, they took the width, that space in between the mount and the handle, and they made that a little wider, which was smart.
Do you think they should have made this a full-size camera like an R3?
With like the battery grip built in? I don't know. Have the other A9s weren't. So it makes sense that it's not. And hey, guess what? Now we can sell a battery grip.
Which they made a new battery grip for this camera.
With 2 batteries, not 3 or 1 giant large battery.
I know. We're going to keep throwing that out into the universe, Brandon. Make the battery grip a battery.
Yeah.
Just a battery. That's it.
Like, part of the reason you have that battery grip is for, like, especially with big lenses, kind of like the weight is the counterbalance. Yeah. So, but there's still a lot of dead space in there. If you're just using 2 dinky small batteries, just cram a big ass battery in it.
And put a power delivery jack on the side, and you can, let's go. I don't understand why they don't do that. That's crazy.
We're smart.
Yeah. So it was cool to see them working on the physical design of the camera a little bit, because that's something I know both of us don't love about Sony cameras, is the feel of the camera, the ergos and stuff. So
they just kind of look. I mean, for me, it's like, you kind of look pretty lame. You look like an 8-year-old drew you. FX3 is super cool. I love the look of that camera, and I love the way it feels. But the rest of like Sony's cameras, it's like, I don't know. If you're a parent that just had like, what are they called? Like sextuplets? It's like all their kids look exactly the same. That's boring.
You're making fun of me for having identical twins now?
No, because there's only 2 of you.
Okay.
Yeah,
but they have like
if
all
you were
their
like
cameras.
if you were like one of 8, Josh, I'd be like, yeah, that kind of sucks. You look like everybody else.
I do have identical twins. That's why it's funny.
That's awesome.
All right, so let's talk about photography a little bit, Brandon. And you could probably chime in way more about this than me. But first of all, global shutter.
Yeah.
If people don't know, I feel like you probably watched 1,000 videos about this already, but it pulls all the information off in one shot, so you don't get that rolling shutter effect. So if you're shooting high action stuff, you don't get any of that warpy, wobbly, crooked images. That's really cool. But I think the big thing here also is the shutter speed.
Yeah. Crazy. It does crazy freaking shutter.
1/80,000.
Yeah. To put that in perspective, the R5 shoots at 1/8000.
So I think when we did the video to collaborate with Tyler about the things we want in the R5, that was the thing you mentioned was a faster shutter speed, right?
Absolutely.
So that's awesome. So in addition to that,
I do have a caveat. Sorry. Just to clarify something earlier, I mentioned that a firmware update was coming in March. Apparently from, I think it was DP or Petapixel. I think Petapixel mentioned that the 1/80,000th of the shutter is a firmware update. Right now, it only shoots at 1/16,000th.
Oh, okay. I also saw
Just
something
FYI.
that said below f1.8, it won't shoot above like faster than 1/16,000 or something. So there's a limitation there too.
Yeah, and then the lenses, and I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Yes. Well, let's talk about that, because they're limiting the third-party lenses to what, 15 frames per second?
Yeah, it's I can't remember. You can see the full list of everything that's, going to be compliant with that shutter, and I heard it was nothing but Sony lenses. So that's kind of a kick to the balls, but I don't know. Yeah. That sucks.
Yeah, so I heard about the frames per second, but that sucks about the shutter speed too. But hey, man, they gotta protect their stuff, you know.
They gotta protect their stuff. Yeah. Sorry, I kind of blinked, and I'm like, I wonder how this is gonna affect flash too. So because like one of the nice things about this new camera is, and we'll talk about it here in a second, is the flash sync speed. I'm wondering if that's gonna have any carryover to the third-party lenses.
Yeah, I mean, that's the next thing I want to talk about is flash sync speed is being 1/80,000 as well. So
crazy.
It's absolutely crazy. I mean, like, I'm not a photographer, but I know that opens up a lot of creative possibilities for
100%
flash photography. And I feel like there's been less flash photography over the years because the cameras are doing so much better low light and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's just one, it gives the flash more power again. right? Like you lose a lot of power when you move over to like high speed sync. So you can get a lot more power out of your flashes, which is rad. Yeah. And then you're going to be able to do some wild stuff like dynamic range wise with a photo with really high powered flashes at that shutter speed.
Yeah. So I think that's also, I think a lot of people are headlining with global shutter and 120 frames per second. But I think the shutter speed's a massive improvement. That's crazy. That's like, I forget what the A1 does, like 16,000th or something.
Yeah, it's wild. And the ability to read LEDs and eliminate banding from there as well.
Yes. Yeah,
like
yeah,
this
yeah.
camera's doing some pretty wild things.
Okay, so some other stuff that's cool, which you mentioned already, was the pre-capture. So it does, what, 1 second of pre-capture for photos? Is it something like that?
I mean, pre-record for like sports is, oh man, it's so nice to have.
Wildlife too, like if you're like camping out and like sports and wildlife, which is what this camera's for.
Yeah.
You know, like I'll be there and it's hard, like I do video more than photo, and I'll be there like waiting for a bird to take off. And I either have to just let the thing roll for like 5 minutes before the bird takes off, or if I had pre-record, but again, we're not getting the pre-record for video, it's just photo.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see it in video, you know?
Hey, maybe in an update in 4 years.
Yeah, maybe.
You never know.
Oh no, they'll sell us another camera by then. So I think that was kind of the main things in terms of the crazy new features. Was there anything else that I forgot, do you think?
Well, you didn't forget it. I mentioned it, and I don't think it's a feature that you would breeze over. Its ability. So like at 1/80,000th of a shutter, you're still gonna get like some weird banding with like LEDs, right?
Okay.
But
okay.
the camera can read those LEDs and then it exposes at the brightest point. So that never happens. So for some of the sports photography that I do, when I'm in a stadium, low light, and the athletes are surrounded by massive LEDs, you can still get some weird like banding issues even when you're using electronic shutter or whatnot. So being able to eliminate that altogether is freaking awesome.
Yeah. And I think what was the other thing about I don't remember. There was something else I wanted to say about that too.
Right.
I don't know. I'm having trouble right now because my notes on my computer is different than on my phone for some reason. So I'm looking down at my phone to try to make sure I'm not missing anything.
Okay.
I want to talk about the megapixels for a second, Brandon. So 24 megapixels was kind of where this camera lives, kind of where sports and wildlife cameras live, like the 1DXs, the R3, right? Those cameras.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are speculating that it was going to be in the 30s, like 30, 35 megapixels. I think people would like a little bit more in terms of that. But I think this also keeps their line in order because they have more of a differentiation between this and the A1.
Yeah.
Were you surprised to see the 24 megapixels?
No. Just like like I said, it's a super niche camera. It's meant for sports and wildlife. And the sports and wildlife guys, like I said, a big part. I mean, it depends on the sport, let's be honest. But if you're somebody in a booth, like when I would shoot jujitsu, like ADCC, you're shooting and then you got to immediately deliver, like immediately. And so 50 megapixels or 24 megapixels, 24 megapixels is much faster to load, deliver. And the people I'm sending it to, if that's just going to social media, it doesn't matter. So cool. Would it have been great? Like, yeah, if you're somebody that's going to, print or something like that, maybe you'd want more. But for most of the working professionals in that environment, like if you're, a photographer for the MLB, you don't need it. And it would probably be more of a hindrance than anything else.
So I think the other thing is they wanted to push this so far out. They wanted to get 120 frames per second. If they had 30, 35, that would not have been 120 frames per second.
Yeah.
And then also we have to deal with the buffers and stuff because they're using CF Express A. So there's a whole other thing that you can just say, I want more megapixels, but if speed is the main thing with this camera, right, that's kind of what keeps the speed up is having less megapixels. So I get it. All right, let's talk about what this means for videographers. And for me, like I am excited to see a full frame global shutter, of course. I think this is new technology, and anytime I see new tech in cameras, even if it's not a camera that I'm gonna buy or fits my needs or those sorts of things, it's so cool to see.
Super cool to see.
So what this means now is that we can see video cameras that have full frame global shutters. Like if they took this and they put it in a video camera
Yeah.
with a fan,
Yeah.
now we're talking, right?
I think for the most part, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
We talked, and I'm super frustrated with the people because I see how many just ignorant comments go up about this, this camera, like people wanting it to be a cinema camera, complaining about things, even though it's not made for it. But one of the things that really frustrates me is they get so upset that this new thing doesn't have all the things that they want. It's like, can't you see that they just did this huge leap forward in technology and what that means 2 or 3 years down the road, right? Like, we know Sony, they're going to throw this sensor in something else at some point. Like, it's exciting to see the boundaries that they're pushing and what that could mean.
Yeah, I do. I think that's true. And Sony is definitely leading the competition here with their cool tech and stuff like that. And they make all the sensors that everyone else uses anyways. So
yeah,
like, so do you think that this is going to get put in a video camera?
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. My first thought was
FX9.
That was my first thought was like, let's put this in the FX9 Mark II. The FX9 is, I think, Sony's camera that needs to be updated the most. It's like the oldest one. And its pedigree is that it is a 6K sensor that's oversampled to 4K. I think this would fit in really well. Yeah. I think it would also have all the frame rates and everything else because you can put a fan in there and you can up the horsepower a little bit. And I think that would be really competitive with the KX.
Yeah.
You have global shutter. It's full frame instead of Super 35. It'll have high frame rates. I think they're going to do it, man. I think that's probably where it's going to wind up going.
Yeah, I think that's the logical move for them to throw it in there.
Do you think that this camera, we're really speculating here, but do you think that this sensor will wind up in sort of the lower end cameras like the FX3 Mark II, A7S IV, like those kinds of cameras? Is that going to be like a different world?
So I do. And I think the rebuttal to that is the cost of producing these sensors because it's really high. And that's really a limiting factor. But is that going to be the same limiting factor in 3 or 4 years? Or will the cost come down enough that, yeah, it does end up in a Sony FX3 Mark II? I think in 2 or 3 years, we could definitely see it in a smaller camera.
Cool. I think the bigger thing will be about what that line becomes, the A7S IV, the FX3 Mark II, or if there's another camera that's just like an FX4 or FX5 or something else that comes out. And that, like, right now, the A7S FX3 is really known for, like, low light, sensitivity, high ISO. Like, that's a big part of that. And that's not what this sensor can do.
It is. I think that's the A7 line, the A7S line, sorry. I think the FX3 is like cinema. And I think with how successful the FX3 has been for independent creators and its like handheld nature, it makes sense to put a global shutter in something like an FX3.
So maybe what you're saying is like the FX3 Mark II and the A7S IV will not be the same camera anymore.
Yeah, I think it would make sense to diverge them just a slight bit.
Okay.
But it's all speculation.
Yeah, we're just having fun with this.
But it just makes sense. Small handheld camera, global shutter, why not?
Yeah. So how long until someone else can buy this sensor? How long till Panasonic or Fuji or Nikon or anyone else, how long do you think they're going to hold on to this tech before they let other people use it?
I don't know. What makes the most money?
I knew you were going to say that.
What makes the most money? Does selling them now make the most money? Or does like holding on to the tech so we just sell these cameras make the most money? It makes sense to me to sell it now.
Yeah. Oh, to sell it to other companies or to just sell it themselves?
No, to sell it to other companies. Like, get started on it now.
Well, they're the only people that have it, so don't you think they're going to like try to make the most money off of that right away? Like,
are they going to put it in some of their own cameras right away?
Well, that's Sony's style. Like, we're going to see this in other cameras.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the A1 Mark II, maybe the FX9. I'm just saying, like, there's a bunch of other camera companies that would like put this in other cameras, like a S1H Mark II, like that sort of thing. I mean, I don't think that camera's going to have that, but I can see them doing it.
Yeah, that would be crazy. Yeah. So let's talk about the price for a minute because we're talking about making the most amount of money.
Uh-huh.
So $6,000.
Yeah.
Now, I think a lot of us were like, Well, the A9 II was like 4,500, so maybe 5,000. But like going up to 6, I think was a big jump for a lot of people.
Yeah, wasn't the A9, or sorry, you said the A9 II. I was thinking the A1, my bad. Yeah, the A9 II was down there. This is a pretty big jump, but it's a pretty big jump in technology.
It is, and there's also this thing called inflation, you know?
Yeah, like again, I think it's more expensive than it probably should be, but guess what? The entire sandbox is owned by Sony right now. They can do whatever the hell they want, and I think they went, F it, let's see what happens. We'll throw a $6,000 price tag on there. Bunch of people will buy it. We'll then immediately sell it for what it should be sold for, and we're off to the races.
Yeah, I think right now they're at a point where they have a product that doesn't exist elsewhere. And so they can kind of do what they want. I kind of think this is like a flex in some ways for Sony. It's like, look, we just came out with this. No one else can do this. We're going to charge you whatever we want. If you want the bleeding edge tech, like this is what it costs.
Yeah.
And they're going to capitalize on that. They also probably spent a lot of money developing the sensor.
I bet. I mean, like, I don't know why so many people are upset with this camera or don't realize how big of an advancement this is. Like, this is going to change photo cameras for forever. Like, it just is. Like, they've set a new precedent as to like what can be done and the technology. And it blows my mind that people are upset with, like, global shutter's not that big of a deal. In a photo camera, it is. Like, I get that it's not in a video camera because it's not the first one, right? The Komodo wasn't the first one. But for a photo camera to be the first, it's like that dude that ran the 4-minute mile. Nobody thought he could do it. Then he did it. And guess what? Like, there were like 127 people that ran the mile right after he did, after thinking you would literally die if you did. So I think it's a huge deal.
I agree. And I think this is a point, I've heard some people say, like, this is a point in camera tech where it's like, it didn't exist and now it exists.
Yeah, it's an inflection point.
So what's going to happen with other camera companies now? Because I think this, like, a lot of people will like, what's Canon going to do? What's Nikon going to do? Like, what are sort of the responses here? Like,
you and I both know that everybody's like, Canon. I think all the pressure goes to Canon. Because they haven't done shit, right? Like, it's just crickets. It's like, here's a new lens that you probably don't need because we made it for like 35 people. But I think all of the pressure is on Canon to deliver. Like, Sony really just like threw down 4 aces and Canon's like, God damn it, do we have a royal flush? I'm not sure. But other camera companies are definitely like, I wonder what body we can throw that in. Like, how can we use it? Because there's so much hype around it. But definitely Canon is like, if they don't come out with something just insane in the R1, and we say that, like, is there a point where Canon can change their camera? I don't think so. I think the R1 is what it is and it can't change. So unless it's got some wild tech in there, this is going to be, because that's like their big sports action Olympic camera. Like, they got to deliver.
I think the R1 has been pushed back for years because they keep like saying, oh, we need to make this better. We need to make this better. We need to make this better. And then like, because they were talking about the R1 like years ago and it never came out.
Yeah.
And a lot of people go, like, you just did the move, like, come on, Canon, what do you got? Like, this stuff is years in planning. Like, this isn't like a quick sort of reaction to it. But
yeah,
I do think Canon's got to come back strong in 2024. I mean, we keep talking about the R5 II, the R1. The rumors got quiet again. I haven't heard anything lately. So
there's definitely, this is a TikTok video where somebody got slapped in the face and we're all looking like, how's this person going to respond? Like, what's going to happen here? So I don't have.
All right, so
I don't know.
So let's talk about that high-end market for a second. Like, let's talk about the A1s, the R1s. So the A9 II or A9 III, sorry, is $6,000.
Yeah.
So the A1 is $6,500. So if they come up with another A1, an A1 Mark II, what's that going to be? $8,000?
I don't know.
How much is the R1 going to be? $8,000, $9,000?
I don't know. I have no idea. It just, I mean, if the R1 has internal NDs like it's rumored to have, if it does have a global shutter, which at times it's been rumored to have, then yeah, like I've said before, I would love to see a camera company disregard price and just say, let's make the greatest freaking thing we can possibly make. And to me, I feel like the A9 III is almost that. I feel like it's almost that. They push the boundaries on everything other than like the memory card choice. Had they gone to like CF Express Type B or an internal SSD, then I would have been like, yeah, they basically did everything they could have possibly done to this camera. So if the R1 does it, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was $8,000, $8,500. I wouldn't be surprised to see an A1 Mark II at, $7,000 or $8,000.
Yeah, I'm curious what they wind up doing with that world because, I mean, I would love to see them just throw everything in the camera.
Yeah.
Like let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. So I'm curious what Canon's gonna do. As you said, they're just putting out niche lenses and putting stuff on sale. That's all that they're doing right now is like selling stuff cheaper and just hanging out. That's what I see.
Yeah. It feels like they've almost given up in some ways. I know that they haven't because they've put out these new lenses. But sometimes I'm just like, I don't know. I'm frustrated with Canon. I'm hopeful for Canon. I'm a fan of Canon. I'm a fan of all these camera companies. I want to see them all do really well because that's good for us.
Yep.
But right now, it doesn't look good for Canon.
I agree. And you think about in the video space, it's like they came with the C70 was like a happy accident. That sold way better than they thought. Then the R5C was like, okay, we're going to like Frankenstein. We did a whole episode about the R5C. And that was like their last camera that like, come on,
Yeah, I think the monkeys at Canon, maybe just the last one killed over and died and they're just waiting for the new set to grow up and then start making the decisions. I don't know.
All right. So one other thing I want to point out about this A9 III announcement was the announcement itself. And it was interesting to me because they didn't give out the cameras ahead of time to people to test. So this was very different. They like had a press release. They brought in all the influencers to like review, like to preview the cameras and to like post and talk about it. Do you think that this was, I'm speculating here, a little bit rushed because maybe they know something's coming out soon that they want to just at least get the announcement out to get the hype out and like not lose the thunder?
I didn't think about that, but like, are we that close to an R1 announcement? That feels like the only thing that could quote unquote scare Sony into rushing anything.
Because from what I saw, like this is all pre-production models. They didn't send it to any, like I don't think anyone got the camera ahead of time to test and make videos about.
Yeah.
The camera's coming out in like mid to late February is when it starts shipping.
So we still got a little ways before the Olympics. This is going to be an Olympics camera. I'm trying to take the more logical route rather than the angry Brandon route for a second.
Yeah.
I've heard from numerous people that get to go to like Sony creator camps that Sony is very much like, hey, what do you guys need feature-wise in a camera? And even though they're not that great about doing updates, they're really good about putting features in that people want. And so it's pre-production. There's still enough time that maybe they can do some things to the camera. I'm not saying that they're going to move from CF Express Type A to CF Express Type B, but maybe they can do some things and they needed that buffer of time.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I just thought of this as like a different pattern with their announcements than they usually do. So I was kind of like thinking about why that could be. That's all. I don't have an answer to any of this stuff.
So what I think is interesting is like a lot of the stuff that we're seeing is coming from a segment of YouTube that is not meant for this camera, right? Like all the YouTubers that we're watching, are any of them professional like sports or wildlife shooters? Nah, not really. Like Tony Northrup isn't, Petapixel, Gerald Undone isn't. It's not a knock to any of them, but it's like those aren't the people that are critical in giving the information back to Sony because that's not who they designed this camera for. It's like, yes, let's come and that can like make the hype train go, but it's not necessarily the people that are going to buy and use the camera and whose feedback is like real critical.
Yeah, I feel like from the people that I saw post about the event, it was like, I don't think any of them would use this camera. Well, I'm just super curious about when the camera gets in people's hands to actually review it because I think the big headlines, and I think this is maybe where some of the hype talk is about like the speed and the global sensors. Like, let's see how good this camera actually is in terms of image quality, dynamic range, noise, all that stuff. So that's to be determined. I think my gut says it's going to be a little bit of a letdown for the price, because you're paying for that global shutter, fast shutter speed, those kinds of things. And there's no mechanical shutter. We forgot to mention that too, Brandon, none. You don't need it. So I wanted to mention that earlier, and then I forgot. I got flustered with trying to find my notes and everything. And that's a different strategy as well, that there's no need for it, so they don't put it in there.
Yeah. I'm excited. We'll see what happens. I definitely am curious to see how this will affect stills dynamic range. But I mean, it doesn't sound like it still shoots 14-bit. So, I mean, that's a color space, but I can't imagine that it's going to take a huge hit in stills. And that's what they're making it as. Sure, maybe it does in video, but I don't even care.
Yeah, we'll find out. And if I can get my hands on one, I definitely will, but I will be doing video stuff, not photo stuff.
Good on you. I have a friend that's currently trying to acquire it, so I will hit him up and see what he thinks.
All right, that's cool. I mean, I won't get it till after it comes out, so
yeah,
we'll see. All right, Brandon, any other closing thoughts about the A9 III and, Sony in general right now?
Let's see. I just want to see the hate in the comments. I want to see what happens. I want to get everybody's opinion on this.
All right, so as I wrap my thoughts up too, I'm also really excited to see Sony come out with something that's really new and isn't a recycled camera, because I know I complained about that so many times. Like,
stoked.
Enough of these A7C Mark IIs, A7CRs, ZVE1s, A6700s that are all other cameras.
They should have called this something else. They should have called this the Sony Devastator.
They're not, dude. It's always the complicated names that you can't remember, dude. They're not going to give it an actual name. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching, and we're really pumped about all this. We'll see you guys real soon.
Peace.